The person I'm getting married to doesn't like go. They've already decided they want to give up the dog. They will go and find a way to do it. Whether it's tie the dog on a pole in the middle of the street somewhere, whether it's abandon the dog in a forest or some empty area, people do this. I will train everyone in your house. I will work with the whole family. I will educate all of them depending on how involved they are with the dog.
You'll go to their house.
Whether it's going to their house or them coming home or online consults, whatever model works for that particular client.
Is it like a lifestyle business?
It is a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle.
It is a lifestyle. It has to be a lifestyle. If it's not, you're not doing it right.
Welcome to the Pets Are Family podcast, a show where we dive into the latest trends, news and stories in the pet industry. Each episode, we talk to industry experts, founders and pet lovers. Together, we explore ideas, innovations and real stories that are shaping the future of pet care. Basically, everything for pet lovers from pet lovers. I'm your host, Anil Reddy. I'm so glad you're here. So, grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's jump into today's episode. Today's guest has built a life around understanding dogs, not just training them, but truly connecting with them. Meet Tara James. Her journey started in rescue world, working hands-on with shelter dogs in Bangalore. That experience sparked something bigger, a mission to help dogs and their humans live in complete harmony. She started Canine Synergy, a special dog training center on a farm in Whitefield. Here, she offers everything from a full board and train programs to advanced obedience and behavior training. And if that wasn't enough, she also runs Anarchy Canine, a working dog club inspired by American PSA sport, where she trains high drive breeds in everything from precision obedience to controlled protection. In this episode, Tara opens about her journey of fighting depression and how pets played a huge role in pulling her out of it. What sparked her interest in dog training and some unforgettable stories from her time as both as a rescuer and a trainer. This knowledge pack episode is full of real insights for pet parents wondering whether to get their dog trained or not, and also for passionate individuals who dream of becoming dog trainers themselves. Get ready, this conversation might just change the way you think about dogs and people who train them. Today we have Tara James, and Tara James is someone that my team specially wrote a special message to me that please bring her to the show. Welcome to Pets Are Family show, Tara.
Hi, man. Thank you for having me.
Okay, like I always tell this to people who come to the show, introduce yourself in less than a minute.
Okay, my name is Tara James. I am currently 24 years old. I'm a dog trainer and I have been in this industry since I was 16 years old. I started volunteering at a dog shelter and I basically found my purpose with working with rehabilitation of dogs at the shelter. I went on to do numerous dog training courses, practical, theory, everything I could do to learn more about dog behavior. I started my first business when I was 21 years old. I opened a studio for training called the Collar Club in Alsur, and very quickly outgrew that space and needed a bigger outdoor facility for the kind of dog training I started doing. I got into PSA, which is a dog sport, and I'm competing in it currently with my dogs. So the more I started doing that, I was like, okay, I need more outdoor space, and then I dissolved that business and I started a new one, which is my current brand, Canine Synergy. And it's basically a training and boarded train facility based out of a farm on Whitefield, Hoskote. And I wake up, eat, breathe, sleep, and shit dogs. So my whole life right now is dogs and dog training. I have 3 of my own personal dogs that are competition prospects and about I don't even know how many rescues that we take care of currently. So we have about 10 plus rescue dogs as well. My personal dogs, and I deal with on an average 8 to 10 client dogs a month. So I am surrounded by dogs all the time and finally living my dream.
Wow, you took that mermaid very serious. I was counting Sakisi, my awesome introduction. Okay, how did this start? For 21 years you started.
My entrepreneurship journey started when I was 21.
And you started, you got into this domain when you were 16, 17 years.
16, yeah.
I want to hear that story.
I always grew up with dogs. My mom's father was a vet and dog handler in the army. I did not have the privilege of meeting him, but he obviously raised my mom in a particular way. She grew up riding horses, so she used to do horse riding competitions and stuff when she was a kid. She's always grown up with dogs, so she always made us very sensitive towards animals. My mom and I would be the type to rescue any random bird, squirrel, whatever we saw when I was growing up. And I got my first family dog was a lab when I was around 7 years old. So I've always had a dog at home when I was growing up. And I basically had shifted schools to a new school in high school, and I had a lot of issues with like being bullied in the new school and mental health challenges. And my dog at home was like a huge comfort factor at that point for me. So when things started getting really bad for me in school, I decided that I wanted to drop out of that school and take a gap year to like really figure out how.
Can't believe somebody bullied you. And really can't.
Yeah, it's definitely that version of me was easier to bully, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I dropped out of school and took that gap year, I knew like being with dogs makes me really happy in whatever happiness I could find at that point, like dealing with depression and everything. So I was like, okay, I want to like volunteer my time at a dog shelter because I'm free the whole day. Every other person that was a friend of mine or anything was going to school, obviously, right? So I couldn't even like spend time with my friends or anything like that. So I was completely isolated, and I started working with this dog shelter. And they were a particular shelter in Bangalore that specialized in taking in dogs with behavior issues. So, a lot of shelters reject dogs with aggression and things like that because they don't have the manpower and the facility to manage those kind of dogs. This shelter didn't do that. They would take in those kind of dogs and either keep them there permanently or try to rehabilitate them in whatever capacity they had and look for homes that were willing to manage those kind of dogs. So when I came in, obviously in the beginning, I wasn't permitted to like work directly with those dogs. I had to observe for a very long time. So I spent a few weeks just observing, like
How did you approach that?
nothing. Shelters are pretty open to having volunteers. You can just reach out to a shelter and ask to be a volunteer, and they will be happy to have you because
You walk into any shelter?
any shelter, unless it's a very specifically like a medical treatment facility, they may not like allow random volunteers there because it's a medical facility. But shelters and adoption centers, they are always happy to have more hands.
But you don't need a prior experience for that.
So typically, it's the responsibility of the shelter to delegate tasks depending on your prior experience and skill level. Like if you have no experience, then they'll ease you into it and maybe ask you for some help with like social media, administrative work, that kind of stuff, and ease you into the dogs. I had enough experience with dogs, and I was, I don't know if I should call it confident or reckless, but I was overconfident. So I was like, yeah, I'll work with any dog. So they just kind of like capitalized on the fact that I was confident and put me in situations where I had to like really like in that moment learn how to read that dog's body language. So it was great. It was a great push for me at a very young age. So even though I'd been bitten by dogs at that point and I made mistakes like numerous times, it did not like dissuade me from wanting to understand dogs more. Every time I got bit by a dog, I would be like, damn, I did something wrong. It's not the dog's fault. I did something wrong. So I would like really sit down with myself and like reanalyze the whole situation and be like, okay, what did I not read properly? What did I miss, right? How did I not see that coming?
And so how was your first experience dealing with the dogs at the shelter?
It was amazing. Like, it was a lot of stress because, if you don't have prior exposure, I think being in a place with like 30 to 50 dogs in one space, it can be very overwhelming on some days because dogs end up getting into dog fights. You have to split up fights sometimes. There's a lot going on. There might be like a sudden rescue case coming in and you have to deal with like a really sick dog one day. There might be like 5 people coming to look at potential like adopters coming on the weekend. So it's a very high stress job for sure.
But you were already going through some mental stress, right? But how did you deal with?
So I feel like this kind of stress really was not a big deal to me. And this kind of stress that this environment was bringing like helped me like rise to the challenge and rise to the occasion to be able to do the job, right? So I was like, no man, I'm passionate about these dogs. I care about them. I've built a bond with them now in these few weeks. I want to see them go home. So whether it's training them or whether it's going out for like adoption drives and events or whether it's like talking to people who come there looking to adopt, I want to do all of these things to help this dog find a home. So that kind of stress, like I think at that point, like I didn't even realize it was stress because I was coming out of, dealing with humans and dealing with like very hormonal teenagers bullying me all the time in school and things like that. So a dog biting me was like the nicest part of my day at that point, So it wasn't stress, but yes, in hindsight, like when you look at your lifestyle at that point, if you don't know how to regulate well, and at that point, I was super young and I was not settled in my life at all financially. So I wasn't eating properly. I wasn't eating my meals on time. I was working like very long hours, like 6 days a week. And for that kind of job where you're outdoors all the time, like eating well, eating on time is very important. And like when I was failing to do that, it started to affect me like badly. I was like, fainting and things like that. And that's when I was like, okay, I need to take a break from this. And like, yes, I want to be with dogs and all of that, but I don't think I can handle the pressure of this environment right now. So I took a step back from shelter work and I went on and did a bunch of courses after that to like learn more about dog behavior because, of course, shelter gives you experience with everything, right? Like I did the hands-on rescue treatment side of things and all the first aid stuff I can do with dogs, the behavior rehab part, the adoption part, social media part. I got experience with everything, and I was like, okay, what I really enjoy is the behavior rehab part. So then I was like, I'll go ahead and I'll do these courses and I'll learn more about dog training and figure out what kind of dog training I want to specialize in.
How was your parents' reaction? You quitting education at 17, then at rescue center.
I think it's a big thing, right? Like no parent dreams of their child being uneducated and unemployed or something. So it was definitely like a shock for them in the beginning. My dad took a very long time to wrap his head around it because he's very academically oriented. Like he's a IIT Kanpur alumni. He's a brilliant mind. No, he's really, really intelligent guy, right? So I don't think he really understood why, in his eyes, I was wasting my potential by not studying and by not like doing more with my life. But I think it took me kind of like fighting with them for a while and roughing it out and just like being like, no, this is what I want to do. Screw everybody's opinion, right? For a while. And of course, there was a patch where I was hardly speaking to my parents properly. Like every time we spoke, it would result in a fight. They just didn't understand my life. I just didn't understand their perspective at that point. But I think once they saw me really committed to this journey, like that I'm not swaying here and there, that this is what I want to do and I'm proving it. I'm going through whatever hardships come with selecting this, right? That's when they were like, okay, she's committed to what she's doing. She's clearly doing well because she's like growing in whatever she's doing. So then they were like, okay, like we'll start to offer more support. We'll try to ask more questions instead of like coming up to you with like judgment and like all these preconceived notions about what you're doing, right? And I think like we slowly started like turning things around. They started being much more involved in my work. They wanted to see what I was doing. They wanted to visit the shelter, things like that. My mom's always been like more of a softie, obviously. She's, even if we've disappointed her or even if we've like had fights or whatever, she's more, I think, sensitive to just wanting to see us happy and things like that. So she comes around much quicker than my dad. My dad takes a lot of time to internalize, process, and then come when he feels like he can have like a logical conversation with you. Until that point, he's just like, no, I don't understand what you're doing, so I don't want to be involved.
You left home when you were 18?
Yeah.
Wow. Nice.
Which is also very, very new for like women in my family and things like that. Like, it's not normal to just like leave home and not like study and try to be independent and like at that age.
Did the shelter pay you money for you to source?
So for the first 2 years, no. For the first 2 years, I was going as a volunteer. So I would basically like be catching 2 buses, walking, getting there, going.
Where was the shelter that built really?
So when I started the shelter work, I was living in my parents' house in Alsur and the shelter was in Silkport. And I was doing Alsur to Silkport every day. Very soon into that though, the shelter reopened a new branch and closed the Silkport one and expanded to a bigger facility in Sarjapura. Like down Sarjapura Road, Dhammasandra, that side, right? So I moved there. I was doing Whitefield to Silkport, and in between that, my parents relocated back to the Alsur house. And then I was doing Alsur to Silkport, and then from Alsur to Sarjapura. But it was hectic, right? And when I took up the full-time job at the shelter was when I turned 18, and it demanded a lot of time from me. It demanded 6 days a week from me. Monday was the only off day I've had since I was 18 till now. Because it was shelter work and then directly into entrepreneurial life, and my business runs on the weekends. That's when people are free to come down for dog training classes and things like that. So till date, the lifestyle I've had, Monday's been the only off day I've ever had. So I don't know the concept of like weekends and Sundays and things like that, like everyone else knows it, I guess.
Is there any experiences of the shelter? Because for us, people watching this video, they have no clue what shelter is.
Yeah.
Okay, they don't know what it is. And just before we started recording this, you spoke about people just come and leave the dogs there. And can you talk more about it.
So when you talk about dog shelters or animal shelters, there's many different kinds. Okay, there will be treatment facilities that pro bono or are publicly funded to offer very very cheap medical care for stray animals or rescues and things like that. And then separate from that, you have just adoption centers. So the one I worked at is an adoption center. It was not like a medical facility. It's not like a hospital. But the dogs, after being treated in their medical facility, would come here. We had to rehabilitate them behaviorally, add minor medical things as well, or injuries and recovery and things like that, and then look for homes for them. So our job was to get to know the dog in and out, understand the dog's temperament, understand the dog's triggers, understand everything that the dog likes, dislikes, to be able to place them in an appropriate home, and make sure that you're also vetting the adopters to find like a suitable home for the dog. There have been many situations in which, we've rejected adopters as well, because we can look at them and understand that they are not thinking about the long term when they're taking the dog. It's a very like, I'm free now. I have a remote job right now, so I want a dog at home. I'm like, is your job going to be remote for life? Right? And if you have to go back into work tomorrow, is this dog going to be okay being alone at home 5 days a week? Right? And once we would give them those reality checks, a lot of people would be like, this is too intense. Why is there such a hard interview process? And I'm doing you a favor and adopting a dog. Like, you're not doing me a favor. Because if that dog's going to come back to me in 6 months with even more behavior issues that you've created, you're not doing me a favor, right? So my job is to educate you and make sure you're making an informed choice. If we don't see eye to eye, that's okay. You can go get the dog from somewhere else. But I don't want to be in a situation where I'm getting adoptions done and the dogs are coming back every few months, right? Because that's not good for the dog either. We've seen numerous people give up dogs in the shelter, so we understand that.
Especially after COVID, right?
Especially after COVID. Like,
Can you tell me the COVID story? Because people got excited working from home. And
yeah. So I think that was the major thing, right? Like, a lot of people who truly should not have had dogs, in terms of the fact that their lifestyle is not good for having a dog, their work schedules, their timings, their even they are maybe like just very social people, right? They want to spend their whole weekend out, like traveling, party, whatever it is. And that lifestyle is not cohesive with having a dog in the house, right? But the thing is, COVID messed with the reality as we knew it for everybody, right? So a lot of people who all of a sudden like, no, I'm at home, I'm alone all the time, I'm getting like depressed, I'm getting like, so more than anything, I feel like people got dogs during COVID out of like an emotional impulse kind of thing, like where, they were lonely, or they were like feeling like this void of emptiness because they're not meeting their friends and socializing and things like that. And having a dog for support, comfort, or something to focus your energy on throughout the day seemed like a great idea. But what COVID actually did for the dog was numerous dogs were brought into homes where they were not exposed to the outside world. They were not socialized with anything. Even when they did go out, they saw this like dystopian reality where everything is quiet, where there's no construction sounds, there's hardly any traffic, there's nobody walking on the road. And these dogs became very sheltered in a sense, right? And then when COVID let up and, life just went back to normal suddenly, people started going back to work. The dog has severe separation anxiety because he's never been left alone at home, right? Or the dog is now really reactive when he steps out into the real world because every stimulus is new to him, right? Traffic is new to him. People walking in groups is new to him. Some dogs, like some clients will come up to me and say things like, oh, because my dog was raised in COVID, he has issues where he reacts to specific type of people. Like he will react to somebody wearing a burqa, for example, right? And why is that? It's not because the dog is discriminating the person or something like that. It's just that he was raised in an environment where he didn't see people in general outside of the people in his day-to-day life. And seeing people with different attire, even it could just be like a helmet. It could just be somebody like, wearing like a very big jacket, carrying something big, right? Anything that can make a dog be like, this is new. Should I be suspicious, right? But the thing is, these dogs who were raised in COVID, almost everything was new to them. So they were very reactive when they're taken out at all. Now you have people who've gone back into full-time jobs who do not have the time to sit and train these dogs for all these issues that have happened. Dogs have separation anxiety. Dogs are not capable of being alone at home. Now this person is in a position where they have to either give up their job to sit at home and take care of this dog, or they have to give up the dog to be able to go and afford this job to pay rent for their house, right? And obviously, when people are in that situation and it's a financial decision, the dog is disposable. So what ends up happening is they come to shelters. They give us all the excuses in the world. We try our best to connect them with trainers. We try our best to talk to them about working it out and training the dog and everything. and explain to them that you can work on these issues, right? But it'll just take some time, effort, money for now. But they were like, no, I don't have that and I don't care enough for that.
And you dealt with all this.
You still have to be nice about it, because if you are too rash and if you are too judgmental when someone's coming to give up a dog to you, they will not give up the dog to you. They'll go leave it on the road somewhere. If you make them feel judged, they will not sit there and entertain that conversation. When they've already decided they want to give up the dog, they will go and find a way to do it. Whether it's tie the dog on a pole in the middle of the street somewhere, whether it's abandon the dog in a forest or some empty area. People do this. We get pet dogs from pet homes, tied on the street, tied to a tree somewhere, abandoned in the most ruthless conditions. And you can look at the dog and tell that it's a pet dog. It's been in good condition, no health issues, and the dog's just tied somewhere. So you know that people are running away from responsibility and choosing to do that. So when you, as a adoption counselor, or you're working in a shelter, when you get those kind of people, you try your best to offer them the options, right?
But do the shelters train you on how to deal with them?
Not all shelters. Shelters are NGOs, man. Nobody is a pet professional or a really experienced dog trainer sitting in a...
Not just dealing with those people, right?
Yes, to a certain extent, they'll tell you from their experience, but they're all also learning a lot.
Honestly, I cannot handle such people.
Yeah, I can't.
Coming and leaving the dog.
It takes a lot of compartmentalization, right? Maybe I would want to yell at them, or I would want to say really rude things and want to make them cry and go home. But you can't do that. You have to think about what's best for this dog right now. If I push this person away, I won't know what happens to this dog. But if I keep an open line of communication with this person that doesn't involve judgment, at least when they decide that they're giving up the dog or they make that decision, I'll help them do it in the right way, rather than them going and tying the dog somewhere, leaving the dog in some random place. Or the worst is actually trying to rehome the dog on your own. Because you have a dog who has all these behavior issues. You clearly don't understand dog behavior. You're going to try and find a home for this dog. You are not going to inform the home about what they're getting into. And you'll end up in a situation where you've given the dog off to somebody else, washed your hands of the problem. That person is now like, man, this dog is barking all the time when I try to leave the house. I can't have a dog like this. Now the dog gets given up again.
How did you deal with this one, man?
Yeah, a lot of therapy, dude.
Because
a lot of therapy.
at 16, going through all the stuff because of all humans, and again you go and work in a shelter, and these humans come with dog to let go the dog, and you're dealing with the humans again. I don't know, how did you handle it? Anyways,
lots and lots of therapy.
So after the adoption center, all the COVID scenes, I want to ask you one thing. What's the most common excuse that people gave when they left the dog?
No, I think the most common was just work. I don't have the time for the dog. And if you ask me honestly, it's fair. I would rather that somebody that can only give the dog half an hour a day doesn't have the dog. If it's a perfectly good dog, which most of these dogs are, they're super sweet dogs, just a lot of energy, right? How can you expect this dog that was bred to be a dog to just be okay sitting in a 2 BHK all day while you go to work, right? If that is going to be the life of that dog, maybe it's better that they gave the dog up, because that dog is going to be miserable in that lifestyle. So if you're going to be someone that says, no, I cannot bend my work schedule at all. I'm out of the house 7 hours a day. When I come home, I have to take my kids to this, I have to do this, I have to do that, or whatever it is, you have other commitments that in your head is more important. And your idea of a fulfilling life for that dog is 15 minutes morning walk, 15 minutes evening walk, right around your apartment and come back. Maybe it's better that you give the dog up, whether he spends the life in the shelter or we find a good home for him. It's just, I don't see how that would have ever been a happy life for that dog.
What's the lamest excuse that people gave that made you feel like punching their face?
I think
Did you ever feel like...
Yeah, I think the icing on the cake for me was people coming up being like, I'm planning to get married. The person I'm getting married to doesn't like dogs. Really? Is this not part of your vetting process when you're trying to get married? My first question if I'm trying to get married to someone is, do you like dogs, bro? If not, sorry, bye, right? And I'll be like, your marriage doesn't even happen. This dog's been a part of your life for 6 years, right? He's held you and he's been there wagging his tail when you came home crying after all your biggest breakups or whatever. And now this dog is disposable to you because you're getting married and this guy that you're planning to marry doesn't like dogs. You're not willing to put in even a bit of a fight for this dog who's been with you for 6 years or 7 years or whatever, right? And we've had people give up really old dogs. And I think that's the worst. I think that's the worst kind of person where you find a way to justify this in your mind where you're like, yeah, it's fair or what I'm doing is right somehow that I'm giving up this dog who's lived his entire life with me for 6-7 years. Who's basically a senior dog at this point.
Now let's talk about your dog training courses and stuff. And where did this happen? In Bangalore?
I've been to courses all over India. Dog training as a field, like there is not like, you can't go to a college degree in it in India. So now there are new diplomas and things like that coming out in canine specific courses and all of that. But it's very new in India. So if you want to study dog training, your best bet is to find a dog trainer that you like, that aligns with, your approach towards dogs, and somebody that you like the way they're living their life, not just the dog aspect of their life.
How do you find them? How do you find this trainers?
Now, at this point, honestly, just social media. Like everything's out there online. People are quite transparent with their training methods and what they're doing with the dog. So you see somebody that's, using an approach or a method that aligns with you and that you feel like, okay, that's the route I want to take. You just go to them, ask them openly, like, can I do a mentorship course with you? Can I do a program with you? The best way to learn dog training is to shadow a good trainer, right? Go for a shadow program, literally like, walk, breathe their life and see if this is for you. If it's not, make your decision there. You'll still get a lot of knowledge about dogs out of it, but honestly, as a career, it's not for everyone.
But 2 years in shelter was enough for you to decide that this is where you want to build your career?
Yeah. For me personally, yes, because 2 years in a shelter means like, I can't tell you how many hundreds of dogs. So hundreds of dogs, which normally people who just went directly, like someone like you went and just did a dog training course. Maybe you trained 4 dogs during that course time, right? And after that, only when you get clients, you're training dogs. So how many clients dogs can you train in a month? Maybe 5, maybe 6, right? So you're getting only that much experience. In a shelter, I was working in a place where every day I was waking up and handling like 120 dogs in one place. So
All breeds.
That all breeds, right? All different kinds of dogs. So that kind of experience, I don't think anything else can give you.
What's the most common breed that people let go?
Sorry. Most common breed?
That people abandon or like?
I think now it's hard to say, man. All breeds are being abandoned and let go of. There were phases, depending, and these waves, depending on what was trending in breeding.
Like one of my friends mentioned Rottweilers were very common.
Rottweilers and German Shepherds are very common simply because, and any of these breeds, right? Rotties, German Shepherds, Pit Bulls and all, the reason of those dogs being abandoned is because a lot of people want this very macho looking dog. They are not somebody that can be a good leader on their own. So they get this dog, but have no idea how to provide the leadership and the structure that this dog needs to be a balanced canine citizen in society, right? So now you have an out of control, really, really powerful dog. And it reaches a point where the owner also is scared of the dog. So most of the time, that's why those kind of dogs end up getting given up, because of behavior issues that the owner has created due to a lack of understanding of what that breed requires. But honestly speaking, what's more commonly given up would probably be like labs, golden retrievers, indies, right? The pets which are in more demand, right? Because every second pet home wants them. And they will all have the same issues after getting the dog has separation anxiety, the dog's barking all the time, the neighbors are complaining, something, and those dogs are given up as well. And that's not because of aggression or something. That's just because of poor planning before buying the dog or adopting the dog.
Super. Let's talk more about your course. And you said you were shadowing the trainers and stuff. And was it in Bangalore or did you travel?
I did courses across Bombay, some in Bangalore. My mentor is in Pune.
So you basically reach out to them on social media?
Yeah, like a lot of them have official pages for their businesses, right? So you just DM their pages or send them an email and explain like what you want to do, your background. And
But they also offer courses, right?
Yeah, they will either let you know about like professional courses that they have coming up. Some trainers like myself also now believe more in like one-on-one mentorship and personalized coaching versus just like I have this group course coming up, sign up for this next batch, right? So there's different types of learning you can do. I did all the kind of like set group courses and stuff as well in the beginning, but I realized I really need a mentor, especially like when I started getting into more wanting to do protection dog training. It's not something you learn in 10 days, 5 days course. Like people who have been doing it for decades and decades of gaining that practical experience with raising protection dogs are now teaching it, right? So you're not going to learn it in a day or two. You're going to be spending weeks, months, years building your own protection dogs in order to fully learn about it. So when I got into this, I realized I need a mentor. I don't need a course. So I went and did a course with my mentor in Pune. And then he's just been an active part of everything I've done since. So I've not done a lot of like other courses after that. I've just gone for short seminars when international trainers come down.
And that happens in Bangalore or
All over. Like, I also host like seminars when my friends come down who are like PSA certified judges or really experienced trainers abroad, right? So when they come down, I host a seminar at my club. Anyone's open to join. It's like 2 days workshops, things like that. And they will share and impart how much ever of their knowledge that they can in 2 days. But again, it's just a seminar. 2-day seminar is not sufficient to equip you to be a dog trainer.
So you trained yourself for 2 years or 1 year?
I'm still training myself.
Now, after that, you started your own when you were 21 years old.
Yeah, Corridor Club, it's a pet dog training studio. That I already had before I found my mentor at Pune and got into protection work. That was pet dog training. I had already done courses before that, and I was equipped enough to deal with like basic pet dog issues.
Nice. So at 21, you started your own. And how did that happen? Did you want to go and work somewhere? And how did this idea of starting your own?
So when I was working in the shelter, I did go to a lot of different trainers and see their facilities and observe their work and everything. The thing is with dog training, right? Like there is no one size fits all method. Every dog is different. Every family is different, and you need to kind of adapt to the dog in front of you in your method and your approach. I was very clear about that because I had had that practical experience with so many dogs at the shelter. When I went to these dog training schools, one thing I noticed was a lot of these big places, like they would accumulate like 60 dogs, 70 dogs, right? All clients' dogs there. All dogs are just in like kennels or cages or whatever. And not a lot of training is actually happening, right? And maybe those dogs are coming out for like really short, like 5 minutes morning, 5 minutes evening, some obedience is happening and they'll send a video to the client. The rest of the day, the dog is just sitting in a cage, right? And I was like, man, like this can't be how a dog training school should be, right? Because I was obviously like super social media savvy and I was seeing dog trainers and shelters abroad. Some of the shelters abroad had much more humane looking facilities than the dog training facilities I saw in India. So I was like, something's wrong, right? And I was like, I don't want to, when I started, I didn't think about board and train because of those kind of places that I saw and experienced. I was like, I want to get into teaching pet parents. I want to educate people, impart whatever I know about dog training to them and have them work on their own dogs and better their relationship with their own dog at home. If I can get them to solve whatever problem they're having with their dog just by educating them and doing practical sessions with the dog on a visiting model, and they can do it themselves with their dog, and that prevents that dog from ending up in one of those board and trade centers where honestly nothing good comes out of it. Most of the dogs come back home from those places like sick, infested with ticks, just like unwell, beaten up. You don't know what's happening over there. Like all kinds of like outdated fear, compulsion, aversion based dog training methods are used in those places. They are not transparent about what they're doing to your dog. If I can help this pet parent understand this dog, train the dog themselves, and the dog can then live happily in that home and not have to go to a board and train place like that, great. So that was the intention when I started my first business. It was a studio. It was just an indoor studio, and it was a big enough studio. I could take like visiting sessions there. So I was doing a model where, like, let's say you sign up with you have a puppy and you sign up with like a 10 session program with me. You can pace out your 10 sessions however you want. You want to come like the first 2 weeks back to back and finish it off when you get the dog home, great. You want to come every week twice and stagger it while your dog is growing up, great, right? I'm offering you a visiting model. You come to me, you tell me what your problem is, you tell me what's happening at home. I show you what to do with the dog. And I expect you to do it at home, send me videos, and we're working like that, right? That's limiting though. If it's very severe aggression issues and stuff, that model will not work because the person itself is too scared of their dog. So it's important for those dogs to really go to a board and train, for somebody experienced to work on the dog and then transfer back to the owner. So when I realized those limitations is when I was like, okay, I have to open a board and train as well. But I was very clear that I wanted to be very small. I'd never want to exceed having like 10. If my team grows really big in a few years, maybe 20 dogs in training, but nothing more than that. And that's when this whole like idea of setting up my own board and train happened.
That's in my field.
Yeah.
Awesome. To start your first business, like what was the kind of investment that was required?
Not a lot. My business partner was an old family friend of mine. Her mom owned the building that my studio was in.
When you say studio, how big is it?
Oh, I don't know exactly in terms of space.
So, if you're interested, back then, did you train the dogs in your studio? Or
Studio plus like a mix of home visits. and online consults and all of that. So I was still like connecting with people all over the country even at that point, and offering online consults as well. Within like a 5-10 kilometer radius of my house and the studio, I used to do home visits as well. But the thing is, the more the studio picked up, I couldn't do that many home visits. Right. So I had to be there. I had to like train my team and all of that. So the home visits is something that cut down quite quick. And I had like very few clients who I was already working with the dog for a very long time, that I used to go continue doing home visits for those guys. But otherwise, it was like you had to come to the studio.
Was it profitable?
It was definitely profitable.
Wow. In 21 years?
Yeah.
Your parents were
Like
free?
it was definitely a profitable model. It's just that it also ended very quickly. It was like a 1.5, 2 years into running the business. I was like, no, I need something bigger than this. And I dissolved that and moved ahead.
So by then your parents were convinced with what you were doing?
By the time I started in my first business itself, they were pretty sure that, I'm determined. No matter what, like what I'm doing, I'm determined to do it. So they were starting to come around and support me and everything. Maybe not fully understand me yet, but they were supporting.
Tell me more about Canine Synergy.
Canine Synergy is my current business. I have a business partner as well. His name is Arjun. And Arjun was a client of mine. When I had my old studio, Polar Club, he came to me with his dog, is a German Shepherd called Coffer. The dog had reactivity issues and everything. And Arjun was just a client. I worked with him and I helped him train his dog. And then, we stayed in touch for years after I trained the dog also. And then when I was setting this up, he connected with me and he was like, dude, I want to get out of corporate. I love what you do. I have seen it firsthand. I've seen it work on my dog. So I want to be involved today. And I was like, cool, man. Like, I need someone like you who's good at like the administrative side of things and thinking business, because I'm all passion and dogs. And like, I will run it to the ground if someone lets me make all the decisions. And we make like a very balanced team. So he's currently supporting everything I'm doing. And he's like getting involved with more hands-on dog training and working with more dogs in the business now. It's a board and train model. Okay. So primarily we have board and train programs, customizable completely. Like if depending on the dog, depending on that individual dog's character and behavior issues, depending on the client's needs, right? The length of the program, the type of training your dog goes under, everything is customized.
Wow.
And it's very, it's very niche in the way that we work, because we're very hands-on, and the whole team like of trainers is there every day. I live 5 minutes away from the facility, but I'm pretty much living my life at the facility. I have my main kennel manager guy who's also into training with me. Like he lives there at the land. My business partner, we're all there every day working with your dogs, right? And we put like our 100% attention into every dog that comes in. So it's a very like personalized kind of board and train. It's not like, you just send your dog and your dog is trained and then they just drop the dog back home after training. Like you are required to come in for classes throughout your dog's board and train program.
Is it?
So if your dog is in training with me, you need to be with me at least 2 to 3 times a week for classes.
2 to 3 times?
Yes.
In my field?
In Whitefield. You figure it out, make the time, make the drive, but you have to come there and you have to invest in learning as well, because dogs are not machines. I cannot train a dog and then give it back to the owner and then be like, yeah, he'll do everything he does with me with you. That's not going to happen. He does everything for me because of a bond that I've developed with him, because he sees me as a consistent leader. He sees me as somebody that gives him clarity, right? And now I need to teach you how to give your dog clarity. Otherwise, training is not going to be successful once the dog comes back home. So a huge part of our model is working hands-on with the client, aside from just training the dog. But yes, the dog needs to be in a board and train with us in most cases, because the best results in dog training are when your dog receives consistency. So if I'm not able to train that dog every single day and I expect only the client to do all the work, what could be done by my hands maybe in like 30 days would take you maybe 6 months to become the dog trainer I am and be able to do it with your own dog. Right? So just in terms of output and just in terms of efficiency, a board and train model is definitely better for the dog. But board and train cannot be just training the dog. That's where we stand apart, because we do a lot of work with the family. Like, if you're coming to me from a household where there's multiple people, I will train everyone in your house. I will work with the whole family. I will educate all of them depending on how involved they are with the dog.
You go to their house.
Whether it's going to their house or them coming home or online consults, whatever model works for that particular client. But we need to make sure that anybody that's going to be a part of this dog's ecosystem is trained by the time the dog comes back home.
Okay. And there are situations where people can't travel so far. And how do you, what kind of custom solutions do you offer for that?
So I To some extent, and depending on the type of issues that you're having with the dog, online sessions can do a lot. Okay, like think about like if you're engaging with like a nutritionist, right, and they are coaching you on how to better your diet and your lifestyle. They can do it online. They can coach you, and you do it and implement the changes. You will see the results. You want to slack and you don't implement the changes they're telling you to, you won't see the results. It's as simple as that. But that's how online dog training works. I will educate you. I will go very deep into the issues you're having with your dog. I will give you solutions. I will give you real-time things to do at home and training methods and tools to introduce your dog, etc., etc. But the onus of doing it is entirely on you. So in that model, it is limited by the customer's dedication, the customer's willingness to work with their dog every day, and how much they are actually going to follow through with whatever advice you're giving them. But online does work in a lot of cases. I have trained with some amazing people from all over the country. And I have clients who I've just coached online, and while they've been in like Cebu and moved from Philippines to Korea with their dogs, and I've done just online. They've worked on the dog themselves to the point where they trained specialized tasks to the dogs and got the dog approved as a psychiatric service animal to travel on flight with them. But their training for all of this, when the dog was in Bangalore, I did basic training and crate training for them to move to Philippines. But after that, all the task training that he needed with his dog to get the dog approved as a service animal for the flight, he did on his own.
Wow.
But he was a super motivated guy, super committed to his dog, already had a good foundation of training from when we had engaged in in-person services in Bangalore when he lived here, and he knew what to do. So I could just tell him like, look, Tarun, do this, set up your sessions like this, practice in these environments, proof her training like this, send me videos, I'll give you feedback. And he did everything on his own, right? So if you can take that feedback and coaching well, online can very well work. But if you are not a good dog handler in general, you're very new to dogs, or you're not very skilled, or let's say you've got a dog who has behavior issues and the dog has a relationship issue with you, right? The dog's attacking you, biting you. Online won't really work. You need to have the dog sent to someone specialized in those cases.
So I've recently came across a video where the pet parent was talking about, yes, my dog has been trained, but it was not trained in such environment, where actually he's taken a video where he's walking on the street. There's street dogs, there's construction noise, there's people around, but the dog was not trained in such situation. Hey, do you also consider those things?
Yeah, definitely. So it's called proofing in dog training. Okay, so like a lot of people will come up to me and be like, my dog knows sit, he just chooses not to listen to me. Dogs are not like that. Okay, if you have taught your dog to sit always in the confines of your house, which is an environment which is low distraction for the dog, and then you all of a sudden one day take him out in the middle of Shivaji Nagar, like in some road, and then you ask him to sit there and he's not sitting, it's not because he doesn't know what the word sit means. It's because that environment is far too stimulating, the dog is distracted, and you have not proved training in that environment, right? So it's not that the dog is choosing to be disobedient, it's that in the dog's mind, he's like, hey, you never taught me this. You never taught me how to sit when my senses are overwhelmed by traffic, at people, and another dog barking at me. When I am in a stressed out state, you have not taught me how to control myself and stay in obedience, right? So if you've not done that, how can you expect the dog to just perform anywhere he goes, right? It's like if I teach you how to drive today and I teach you in an empty road and then I put you in the middle of a highway and I'm like, yeah, karo. Right? You can't do it. You need time, you need practice, you need to ease into it, right? And it's different for different people. Some people might like love the concept of driving, so take to it immediately and get a thrill out of like driving and everything very quickly. Some people might have to learn it as a life skill, but are very anxious when there's traffic and take much longer to learn. And it's the same with dogs. Some dogs are very high drive, love to focus, love to train, love food, ready to train in any environment, can be neutral to most things because they're confident dogs, they're stable dogs. Some dogs are not like that. They're anxious, their fight or flight kicks in, the environment becomes too overwhelming for them, and then they cannot respond to obedience in those distractions unless you have trained it enough.
Well, and I've seen videos about dog trainers. They use a treat while training the dog. Is the dog doing it because there's a treat, or is it the bond between you?
So this is like complex, right? Like people think that if you're using food in training, you're bribing the dog and the dog doesn't have a bond with you. But you need to look at it differently, right? There's a way to train in which you're not bribing the dog to do what you're asking them to do. You're creating motivation and desire to work for you in the dog. But having said that, if I never pay my dog, why will he like to work for me?
But the rest of its life, it always listens to you, thinking that he or she is going to treat.
That's again people not knowing how marker systems in training work and how fading out food and fading out visual cues that like a fanny pack or food in my hand and things like that work in training. That's people again like not understanding dog training properly and like getting stuck at that point where the dog needs to see a treat in your hand in order to do something, right? But the thing is, when it comes to good dog training, we have now evolved as a community to understand that constantly asking the dogs to do things for us, which are considered work in the dog's mind, without anything in it for the dog, is a very suppressive, compliance-based way of getting behavior out of a dog. When you look at modern dog training, it's very reinforcement-based. So we look at like negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement, and how that can contribute towards creating motivation to perform the behavior you desire, right? So today, because my dog has a really strong reinforcement history, like I've always marked her for the right behavior and paid her for it, I can get her to do anything that she's done in training where she normally gets payment without it also. And she will do it with equal motivation and enthusiasm, irrespective of whether I have a treat or a ball or whatever on my body, because of that reinforcement history. Because of the belief that working for me is fun and it will result in something positive for her. But in that belief that something positive is not going to come out of this for the dog, then the dog will do it, but will do it without motivation. Right? He'll be like, oh man, I have to do this job today. It's like a guy going to like a corporate job where he hates the job, but he still has to sit there and get it done in order to get like his salary at the end of the month. Right? Versus like somebody who's like working at a startup that they really like because their boss is challenging them every day, their boss is motivating them every day, their boss is like a friend, right? And that person is working, yes, for the same salary at the end of the month, but it's working with a different intention. It's working with actual motivation, right? And you can see that expression of motivation in dogs physical, right? For example, if you see like in competitions and dog shows, handlers healing with their dogs. Yes, the dog will heal no matter what methods you use, okay? Even if you're a really abusive, shitty trainer, you can get a dog to heal. But the point is, the dogs who are healing with their tails tucked in, with their ears dropped down, with their body looking really like, oh my God, if I break out of this heel, this guy is going to beat me up. Versus the dogs whose tail are up. Body is like really perky, like the dog looks happy to do the job. You can understand just by looking at the physical expression of that dog's body language, what kind of method this person has used. Have they made this feel like a tedious task to the dog? Or have they made it feel like, yeah, it's work, but it's also fun?
Good. Is there a good business in Bangalore for boarding and training?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it growing?
Yeah. We don't want to grow in terms of volume too fast. I want to have a good team. I want to have a particular culture in the work environment. I want to have educated, committed professionals who care about your dogs, sitting there waiting to help clients. But I do not want to grow at a rate where, just in order to have 20 more kennels and 20 more dogs, we hire anyone and everyone.
Is it like a lifestyle business now?
It is a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle.
It is a lifestyle. It has to be a lifestyle. If it's not, you're not doing it right.
And how do you promote yourselves? How do you tell the new pet parents that this is required?
So I think because of my experience in this field and because of the referrals that from where they're coming from usually like the person's vet is like, no, you have to go to, or like you have to send your dog there. Or some really close friend of theirs whose dog I have trained. So again, they're giving like a very personal referral, right? Or somebody who's like, let's say, adopted a dog from me in the past is like telling someone else, like, oh, if you want to adopt a dog, take it for training to her. I have hundreds of dogs that I have trained. I have hundreds of clients that I've trained. I have changed people's lives with their dogs and I know what I've done for those dogs. I don't need to try to convince you to change your ideologies about dog training to come and engage in my service. If you don't understand why I use certain tools, if you don't understand why I have very particular programs for particular type of issues in dogs, that's okay. You don't have to engage in our service. But if you are, come in with an open mind, be willing to learn, be willing to implement any method that we use. A lot of people think of like dog trainers as like just some service provider. And until very recently, honestly, like dog trainers are put into that same category as like the guy who comes to cut your lawn or that guy who comes to like wash your car, right? Dog trainer is like some guy who comes, you give the dog, you give the leash, he does one run around the block, he does some training, you don't even see it, and he drops the dog back home. When I was growing up, that's what a dog trainer would do. And
most of us think the same.
That most people think the same. The dog trainer will come, take my dog, do something, but the dog will come back trained, right? That's not how it works. I'm sitting here, like 60% of my job is teaching you about dog behavior and how dogs work. And it's a lot deeper than that now. So I don't need to go out of my way to try to tell you that you need my service, right? If you don't see it as like, okay, no, she knows something that I really don't, which is a very skilled niche thing, and I need that information, so I'm willing to pay for it and give her my time, then it's okay. Like, you don't have to engage in my service. I will find another client who's very, very invested in learning.
But you have enough business. Wow, very good. What are the services you offer?
So we have board train programs, we have puppy school, we have online consultations, we have pre-puppy consultations for people who are planning to get a dog but want deep analysis by a trainer as to what kind of dog, what breed would be suitable for you, right? But if you're new and you don't know, you might make the wrong choice and then you're stuck with that choice for 12 to 15 years, right?
It's more like one-on-one sessions.
This is one-on-one online sessions, or it can be done in person if you'd like to meet us and like see the facility and everything. But pre-puppy consult can be done online because at this point you don't have a dog. You're just planning to get a dog. So it's more like I'm educating you on what type of dog would be suitable for you. Then we have we do events and group classes and things like that for socialization and all of that. And we have visiting program as well. For people who are close by to our facility, you're welcome to come on a visiting model as well. Your dog doesn't need to board with us. If it's like minor things like your obedience, leash pulling, that kind of stuff. If you've got a dog who has like severe aggression issues, we wouldn't recommend a visiting model.
What's a visiting model?
But like you come with your dog, 1 hour sessions, maybe 2 times a week, 3 times a week. We do sessions like the college club model I was telling you about.
Okay.
I teach you, I practice with your dog, I show you with your dog. Then I make you do it with your dog. And you are expected to go home and do it every day with your dog.
Oh, wow, fantastic. Super. And it doesn't matter what breed.
Like that's one thing Kinness Energy stands for. I do not believe in putting dogs in a box. Like, if you're past this age, you can't be trained. If you're this breed, you can't be trained. If you've bitten someone, you can't be trained. Like, I don't think so. I think dogs are one of the most forgiving, living in the moment creatures that you can ever find. So if you know how to train dogs, your training cannot be limited by factors like the dog's age or things like that. Yes, realistically speaking, the older a dog gets, changing certain behavior patterns is difficult. It's like if you've been a smoker for 40 years, getting you to quit is harder than maybe somebody who's been a smoker for 5 months, right? So if a dog's practiced like particular behavior for like 6 years of his life, and then you're going to a trainer, it's going to be much, much harder. It's going to be more expensive for you. It's going to be longer, the dog's training program, because it's a harder behavior pattern to break, right? Versus if you bring a puppy to me, I can do like 2-week, 3-week program. Great. That's enough for me to do foundation, right? I can do obedience. I can do crate training, I can do potty training, all the things that this dog needs to have a good foundation to hopefully prevent them from ever going into that stage where, they have behavior issues later on in life. We can do with young puppies because they're a blank slate. And it can be done like in a very short span of time with young puppies. But if you miss that window and the dog is like now, like let's say 6 to 8 months and above, right? He's pretty much an adult. They already have behavior setting in. The imprinting socialization period in their life is done. So when you've got adult dogs, it just takes a little bit longer and more skill from the trainer. But honestly, like there is no limitation other than health. That's the only limitation we have to our board and train model. If the dog has really severe health issues or something like very chronic that needs constant specialized attention and care, we cannot offer that when we are running like a big training academy. So if it's that kind of case, then we might try to help you as best as possible in a visiting model. But if the dog has severe health issues, the only time that we would maybe deny a dog from coming into a board and train.
Okay, cool. Tell me about your favorite dog, Karma. How did Karma come into your life?
Karma.
Why did you get Karma today?
Karma has a lot of energy, man. If I got her here today, your studio would not be looking so neat. But Karma is my first working line dog. When I decided I wanted to get into PSA, which is a dog sport, I needed...
What does PSA stand for?
Protection Sports Association.
Protection Sports Association.
It's an American dog sport. It's come to India in the last decade or so. And I'm like the new gen PSA. There are a lot of people who've been doing it for way longer than me in India, and my seniors in the sport and stuff, my mentors, everybody who's like way beyond where I'm at in competing with my dog and sport. But I got into it, and I, when you get into working dog training and protection sport like that, you need a very specific kind of dog. Okay, you cannot take any dog and do protection and it's not safe to. You need a very particular type of dog in terms of their genetics. Were they from a working line? Are the parents actively working? What kind of drive profile does that dog have? How much play drive? How defensive? Like, you have to analyze every factor about this dog genetics before you select a dog for sport. So, when you get involved in this, like, every Malinois is not going to cut it for BSA. Every Rottweiler is not going to cut it for BSA. Even within that breed, you need working lines that are proven to be able to handle the kind of pressure that this sport will put the dog through.
But how do you know as a puppy?
You don't know as a puppy. A lot of it has to do with raising. But what you do know as a puppy is the genetics. If I can go there and select a puppy from a breeder who has proven nothing, my puppy's parents, my puppy's grandparents do nothing other than run around in the breeder's kennel, how am I going to say that I can even presume that puppy is going to turn out to be good, right? Versus a breeder who has invested his whole life in dog training, who's a dog trainer himself, where you can see that your dog's mother, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, everybody from your dog's lineage is PSA titled. If you are trying to get into PSA, would you not select a dog from that litter? Exactly, right? So I went to this trainer that I really admire. He had my dog's father and grandfather, and his club member had my dog's mother. And I saw all those dogs working before I selected a puppy from that litter. I saw every single one of the dogs I could see from her lineage actively working. I worked them myself, like in the protection work. I got a feel of the dog. I understood how those dogs are in drive and out of drive in general in life. Like, are they a dog that can be reliable with family? Or are they like a very one-handler only kind of dog? I understood all of those things before selecting my dog. And then I made an informed decision that this is the litter I want to take a dog from. Within that litter also, there were multiple puppies. Obviously, at that age, you can't tell which puppy is going to be great or not. I just went by whichever dog I connected to, and I got Karma. And she was like this skinny, small, being bullied by the other puppies. Same story. Yeah, very same story kind of situation. Like, the reason I picked her is just this. Like, she was free with all the puppies in the house when I went, and they were no longer like very small dogs, okay? They were already like 4 or 5 months old when I went to see them. And all these like puppies were bulldozing each other. Her siblings were like picking on her. And when I was there, she just kept coming up to me and seeking comfort in me. So the first day I met her, I was like petting her and I was chilling with her. When the other dogs were overwhelming her, she would come and sit next to me. So I was like, okay, she likes me, right? And then again, I spent some more time with her and she started guarding me by the second day. So when I went there, like, I'm sitting on the couch, she's come here. Obviously, she's like seeking comfort in me. So she's only guarding me because I'm protecting her, nothing else, right? And she's hiding from the other puppies and they try to come up to me and she's like, and so I was like, okay, she really likes me, right? And obviously, this is not like a confident protection behavior. She's scared and insecure and she feels like comfort and security from me. So she was guarding me. But I was like, man, she really likes me. Like, she's clearly picked me. I don't have a choice now. I'm going to take her home. So I picked my puppy, came back to Bangalore, spent a couple of months aligning my life. Like, I shifted to a bigger flat, that kind of stuff. Because I already had a Rottweiler at that point there. And then I went back to pick up Karma. And I got her down almost 1.5 months later. And I got her down. And then I just started training her. And I realized there's no good protection development clubs or anything in Bangalore. And my mentor was in Pune. So my lifestyle when I got Karma for the first 1 year was every alternate month almost, I was driving to Pune with my dog. I spent a week there from Bangalore. I would spend a week there with my mentor, go to his club, get my dog's development done at his club. He would build her protection work and her bite work. And whatever I could do on my own outside of that, I would come back to Bangalore and do. And of course, I learned more on this journey and I got exposed to a lot more. And he really, really pushed me to start a club in Bangalore. He was like, look, PS is a great sport. You're doing it. You need a club. As you go higher up in the sport, you'll need more decoys. You'll need a club. Just start one in Bangalore. I was like, okay. So I came back and started a club. What does starting a club mean? I made one logo and I was like, guys, please come watch me get my dog.
Did you have to get the permission from the actual PSA?
Only if you're hosting PSA sanctioned events. So when you're doing like a trial and all that, by then your club needs to be registered. So now my club is registered because I hosted our first trial in Bangalore, which was the first PSA trial Karnataka's ever seen. Last year in November, December in Bangalore. So my club hosted that. But yeah, you don't need to be PSA registered just to form a working dog club. What is a working dog club? Essentially, it's like hobbyists, people who are enthusiastic about this kind of training and sport, just coming together and training dogs. It's not a commercial activity. I don't make money out of club. It's a hobby for me. And it is not what my business runs on. My business runs on pet dog training. PSA, working dogs, dog sport is like saying that your hobby is horse riding. Nobody's going to be paying you just to go for horse riding in the evenings, right? But you like doing it, so you're doing it. These people like building these kind of dogs and having these kind of dogs as their pets, but their pets need this very specialized outlet at least twice or thrice a week to get their energy out. So they come to my club with their dogs.
Okay, 1 year since Canine Synergy, and congratulations. And how does the financials look?
It's been good, honestly. We have reached a place where we are no longer worried about consistent demand because we've gone to a place where we have trained so many dogs in the last 1 year itself that just through client referrals and things like that, or even if our clients are planning to get a second dog, the first thing they do now is send the dog for training as a puppy because they're like, man, I saw the magic you did on my older dog, and if I'm getting a second dog, I know that that's where I want my dog to go from the puppy stages and have its foundation done with you. So we're in a really good place in terms of demand. Obviously, we want to expand and grow. So growing pains of any business, anything you make, you're putting back in. That's where I'm going to be, I think, for a long time because of just what I want to do with this business. I'm not in a rush to make it profitable, honestly. I'm in a rush to figure out how I want to expand and in what verticals I want to expand and really put all my time and money into.
Great, awesome. And how many people do you have at Canine Synergy?
Right now, we are a team of 7 people.
7 people, all full-time staff?
All full-time. One of the girls who's working with me, she's on a part-time thing. She's here for a year tentatively. She was also a client. She came down from Guwahati to train with me with her dog. And she decided she wanted to spend more time learning and everything. So she's here right now on a part-time job.
So you're sharing a space in the 3.5 acres with other dog-related services, right? Awesome. Do you plan to get your own
land? Yeah, that's the goal, man. Like,
to back to Sarjapur.
I don't know where in Bangalore, but definitely Bangalore. But that is the maybe hopefully less than 5-year plan, right? You find your own land, you set up a proper facility, you really go hard at investing in the infrastructure when you have your own land. The problem with renting land is always this, right? Like you want to go all out and invest in infrastructure, but then you're holding back because you're like, I don't know how long I'm going to be here. So we're working at a healthy pace right now, but as soon as possible, I would like to move on and have my own land.
Does location and distance matter for your service?
Yes and no. Yes, because it would just be great and more convenient if it was closer to the city and closer to people, right? But because it's a board and train model, it doesn't matter that much because most of our clients are willing to put in whatever time in, if it's 2 times a week that they need to visit their dog, whether the dog is with us, that's okay. Like they will make the time for that, right? Whether it's weekends or whether it's taking a day off from work or whatever while the dog's in training. Our clients are willing to put in that effort for their dogs. So coming twice a week for training sessions while their dog is in board and train with us is not a big deal.
We can't stay back there?
As of now, no. But my long-term model is going to be essentially like cabins. And you can stay with your dog. So if you are coming to me for a training course, I would want another facility essentially that's fully equipped with, like you have your Wi-Fi, you have everything that you need to stay here. So if you have a remote job, you can stay with me for a month, do dog training, have your dog train and then leave. So that would be the long-term goal for sure.
Convenient.
Yeah.
And are you looking for investors for that?
Definitely.
If you're looking for investor, and this is a kick-ass idea. That's it. I have no more questions, and man, I learned so much about what you're doing. And I initially had one very common question that every pet parent had. I think you answered that. Do dogs need training?
Yes.
You answered that so well, and I'm really rethinking. I did send my dog for training, but I was so busy, I couldn't tag along, and that's the mistake I made. And it made me realize that. And I will definitely come and see you. And thank you so much for coming to the show. I think this episode, people are going to love it. And one last question, your advice for people who want to build a career in dog training.
Nobody can teach you better about dogs than dogs themselves. Run to places where you can get practical experience. Do not think that getting a piece of paper or a certificate from a short course is sufficient for you to go out there and train clients' dogs and do everything right. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to mess up dogs. You're going to do things wrong when you start. and it's a constant learning process. If you are the type of person that can accept permanently being a student, this is a great place to be, because it'll challenge you and make you learn every single day. But it's not a field where, because of XYZ degree or because of XYZ accomplishment, you are suddenly like an expert, right? A lot of people might consider me like an expert. I still consider myself a student. I'm still learning. I still wake up every day in my job feeling like I don't know anything. And every time I learn something new about dogs, I feel like the ground beneath me is shaken again. Like I'm learning something new and I'm like, oh man, I wish I knew this 5 years ago. So yeah, just be open to learning, be open to being a student, and you'll do great.
Can someone, a young Tara, reach out to you
Definitely.
for internship?
Definitely. For internships, mentorship programs, anything, even if it's people just interested in getting involved in the pet industry, let's say they want to be a vet, anything, right? Like if you're passionate about dogs, definitely like feel free to DM me, because I can connect you with someone else even if I can't personally help you.
Awesome. Great. Tara, thank you so much for being on the show. If you like this episode, don't forget to support us, share it with your friends, and if you know someone else doing amazing work in the pet space, recommend them to us. We'd love to bring their story to you. Until next time, stay happy and keep loving your pets.